Hello everyone, I'm going to be giving today my last analysis of the 2024 US election and prediction of how I think it's going to go. So last time I did this was the 25th of September. I think I filmed it on the 20th, but came out on the 25th, and my takeaway was basically that it seemed to be 80%, 85% was what I left on, was what I finally summarised on. 80% chance that Kamala Harris was going to win against Donald Trump. And I made a claim there that I didn't even qualify, didn't put any conditioners on it, no shampoo, you know how it goes. And I was probably a bit overconfident. I even said it, I was like, I don't care, I'm not going to say maybe, I'm not going to say probably, I'm just going to say this is going to happen. And what I said was that a week from then, once you get past a week, you'd see Kamala Harris's poll lead go up past 3%. Now, the reason I said this was because every single thing at the time would have suggested that this was true, which I guess is a pretty good reason to say something. But I guess I'm being a bit facetious there. Not literally every single thing, because there was something material, which I'll say in a second, that I should have considered. It's just that the polling seemed to suggest that she was on a poll lead of just under 3 points, and this wasn't like a blip, this wasn't a poll, or this wasn't a few polls, this was a running aggregate from several different aggregators of hundreds of polls over weeks. It showed a pretty clear trend that was backed up. It wasn't all over the place. There was a pretty clear trend of her support in terms of popular vote, like just polling people, who are you going to vote for, was coming up to 3% ahead of Donald Trump. But something I didn't consider when I said, because I looked at the trajectory and I looked at the averages, I'm talking average, just no weighting, none of that fancy shit. I just took a straight average of the last 20 polls up until that point, which have been over the past 2 weeks or so. And in the past 10 polls, which have been over the past 5 days or so, took two averages. And I think I won't go back on the specific figures, I'll probably put them in a caption or something. So the number that I got from the straight average of the past 20 up until that point was firmly over 3%. Again, I'll put it in a caption, but I think it was like 3.5, something like that. And then the average I did in the last 10 polls, which still wasn't just like, it wasn't 5 polls from one company and then 5 polls from another. This was a pretty good spread of polls still, over a few different days, a few different locations, a few different pollsters. And not three, I said few, just mumbled a bit. A few different pollsters. And this was over 4%. It was something like 4.5%. So from that momentum, even though obviously it was just a straight average, but if you want to get your own litmus test and you want to take it out of the hands of the pollsters, because they do a lot of shit to their data, I just looked on 538, which is a great polling aggregator. Maybe not a great aggregator, well, I guess that remains to be seen, but it's a great resource because as well as just giving you their aggregates, they list most of the polls that they use straight underneath it. So I could just use the exact same polls, but instead of doing their calculation, which I don't know, I just did a straight average and got quite a different result. So it's a whole part of it's one piece of the pie. Don't take that as gospel, it's just an average, but it's one piece of the pie. And you also take into account that those averages are after the individual weighting of the polls, because those polls will have been weighted for, race, gender, whatever, and then published, and then 538 gets them, puts them together, decides which polls are more reliable than others, and does more shit to that. So it's not like I'm taking unweighted data, it's still weighted and all that fancy stuff on the first stage, but you're just cutting out that second stage of the aggregator taking it together. So the stats had looked good for Kamala for several weeks, and also I touched on bigger material factors like macroeconomics. I talked about the inflation level, interest rates. GDP barely correlates to like actual living standards, barely. It does just about correlate, but it's not a tight match. But I touched on those bigger factors, and everything, well, not everything, but those are the two things that really matter, like, a lot. There's a lot of other shit, but, like, a lot of that more psychological, abstract stuff doesn't tend to matter. It's just, you know, depressingly, it's, like, big stuff, like macroeconomics and also the polls. Aside from that, it's kind of like reading the tea leaves. Aside from the 13 keys, that's a good thing. I touched on that again in the last video. But because of those things, I predicted that, oh, in like less than a week, and as I said, I was like, not saying maybe, I'm not saying probably, I'm just saying in less than a week she'll be able 3% lead, and you know, in a few weeks I wouldn't be surprised if she was above 4%. I was a bit more tempered with that one. I was like, I wouldn't be surprised, but I was thinking, I was so confident that we'd be here, 3.5 point lead or something, maybe 4.5, and I maybe was hoisted a bit by my own petard. But the thing is, as you can probably tell from my tone and everything, I was wrong about that. I'm filming this on November 4th in the UK, late afternoon in the winter, that's why it's a bit dark, and as things stand, there's currently a 1 point poll lead for Kamala Harris in the polls, and it's been shrinking. Still seems to maybe be shrinking. Won't have much more time to shrink, the election's tomorrow, but over specifically the past few weeks, like not including the start of October, but talking about the middle and the end of October, her lead has gone down, which was a reversal of the trajectory. Now, some people are puzzling, scratching their heads, saying, how could this happen? Other people aren't. This isn't the sort of thing where you need to look at several different sources, because you're actually going to lose more information than you're going to gain, because a lot of liberal and capitalist sources, you know, but I repeat myself, will be obfuscating, be pretending to be confused, and obviously some of them will genuinely be confused. What's all this about? But if you look at more honest expressions of media, like me, hello, or like if you look at more leftist aligned media, it's because of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Don't go and watch like some video by the Times, or I don't know, ITV News or whatever like that. They won't tell you, but it's because of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. It's not because of like 5 different subtle factors. It's because of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. That's basically the main reason that happened. Okay. Oh, lucky for me, this shows that I'm, you know, maybe I should stop predicting things, because 6 days after I put that video out with that confident prediction, Israel actually did their ground invasion of Lebanon. There had been significant missile strikes before that. I think they started just in late September, but to be fair to me, I don't think there was any way I could have predicted that, because I filmed that on the 20th of September. It took me a while to edit it. Got it out on the 25th, and obviously there's always been back and forth, and I think there was a bit of an intensification at that point, and obviously it was on the cards because of the whole Hamas thing, but it was not at the point where you could reasonably show that it was imminent, that there was going to be an invasion, but there was 11 days after I filmed that video, and then, because the thing is, Kamala had seemingly won quite a few people back who were either going to be undecided or were actually like decided not to vote for her. Obviously they wouldn't vote for Trump, but they just weren't going to vote at all because they just could not stomach, even though Trump's a fascist or whatever, or maybe they didn't believe Trump was a fascist, or even though they could not make that choice, they would not make that choice, they refused. Which again, emotionally makes perfect sense, like, which is the thing, like, you can't, there isn't even much of a ground for you to like morally criticize those people, because like, yeah, in a practical sense, you should still vote for her, even though she is currently aiding and abetting in a genocide. The way that harm reduction works, and, you know, wanting the least amount of people to suffer works is just picking the best option. So like that's a very inhuman thing. Like it's a very unnatural thing to think about, that sort of scale of calculation and that horrible, like callous moral calculation. And like if someone doesn't want to do that, or like they can't bring themselves to do that and just swallow it and just vote Kamala because they don't want Trump to, you know, end democracy in America, Project 2025 and all that. I've talked about that before, you look it up. It's a public plan they are openly going to, and, you know, the entire American liberal democracy system should be screaming about this every second of every day, but they're not because they're horribly and maliciously incompetent. But never mind. If they can't make that calculation in order to stop Trump, like, can you really, like, emotionally blame them? You know what I mean? Like, so there was that big chunk of people. Some of them were leftist. A lot of them were just like young people who like have a good information diet, who don't just watch like the TV and like get all their news from there. They watch a bit of TV, they use the internet, you know, they use social media, stuff like that. Radio, you know, if you have a bit more of a mixture, and there's a bit more, even though it's changing now, a bit more democratization online, and they were seeing obviously all that first-hand footage, all those mobile videos, all the actual direct evidence of all the shit that was going on in Palestine. So those who weren't just like mindlessly watching like CNN or like Fox News, and I guess in England it's the same principle, but not as bad. If you're just watching ITV News or you're just watching BBC, for the first year of that genocide, they were like fully in line with denying it. Like almost the first year, like it's only like a few months ago in British news, mainstream media, they've really like even started like considering like terminology like that, like genocide, or talking about like the humanitarian crisis caused by Israel. That's sort of the closest they'll get. Like, oh, Israel has caused a humanitarian crisis. That's sort of the worst sort of things they'll say, that sort of tone. But like young people who weren't just completely locked in on that system, Arabs, obviously, a lot of them have fucking family there. And like, you can't just do shit like this anymore. We don't live 300 years ago where like, if you can just do a genocide and like no one will know, and like they'll never hear from their family again. But it's like, oh, what? And then they find out in a few years time, they're like, you can't do that anymore. They have phones. Like, there were people, like, this was happening and their family was telling them about it while it was happening, and the American news media was just trying to say it wasn't happening and like gaslighting them, like being like, no, fuck you, like if you say this is happening, you're a fucking like Hamas terrorist. It was crazy last year in America. Like, so yeah, Arabs, so that's a big chunk of people. Democrat like, obviously, because of course it is, of course they're that fucking incompetent. It's three of the biggest core Democrat bases: young people, leftists, and non-white people, and they'd disenfranchised them all. And it seemed like this effect was maybe not reversing, but just cooling down a bit, or maybe even just stopping. Maybe even it just stabilized, where the initial controversies of all these protests, all the backlash that didn't change anything, it happened and then it stopped. And Kamala seemed to settle on 2 to 3% lead, and I don't think, maybe it was going to reverse. Maybe that's what that momentum was. It wasn't an economic thing. Maybe it was people coming round to that calculation, people saying, oh my god, it's so fucking horrible that she's literally aided and abetted a genocide. We live in a fucking hellish political landscape. But at the end of the day, how are you going to fight this under fascism? Surely it's easier to fight this under democracy. So a lot of people were coming back around saying, oh, are you okay? Like, they were making that calculation and they were saying, okay, I'll do it, you know? And then, after all that, after everything, and it had settled, it had stabilized, after all that, Israel invaded Lebanon again. And of course, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, the president for now, completely threw all of their weight and support behind Israel. And that's pretty much when the polls started dropping again. And obviously, as I said, you've got this fake confusion of, well, what could possibly be going on here? When, like, the only major thing that, like, has potential ramifications for the polls in this day and age because Americans are so desensitized, bro. The only thing that happened, and coincidentally happened, you know, genuinely within like a few days margin, like as little a margin as you can get, until the polls started dipping again. It's obvious that it is that. There's no other way. Well, like, because a few days is it being exactly the same time. A few days in polling is an instant reaction, because it takes them a few days to take the poll and put it out. So if like the polls dip 3-4 days after something happens in the 2024 election, that's an instant and there was an instant reaction. There doesn't seem to be much else, because the thing I said, I mean, there seems to be a lack of positive because of that thing I said about the macroeconomics. What seems to be the case is that, like, this has been like coming out more and more over the past few months, where, like, statistically, like, if you look at it on paper, like, not trying to doubt people, but it seems more and more that, like, the price of groceries, like the real price, like, if you adjust it for inflation and all that, is actually lower than it was pre-COVID, pre-Russia-Ukraine war, all the gas prices and all that. Grocery prices in America, all estimates, all recording seems to say that they're actually better than they were in late 2019. But one of the biggest things, probably top three issues in this American election is grocery prices. How are we going to get grocery prices down? And I've heard a few theories batted around about why this is happening. Like, there's still so much insecurity, and if you ask people, like, what are they most worried about, what's the worst thing that's happened, like, what's really worrying them, they say, oh, grocery prices have skyrocketed. And it's like, well, they did skyrocket, and then they came back down again. So where's this coming from? And the thing is, going to voters, again, no offense, but this is just true. There is no way you can argue this. We know this to be true. Going to voters themselves and, like, asking them about the issues is a really bad way to gather, like, objective data. Like, if you go and ask, like, voters, just regular people, whether they feel like anything, like, whether they feel like grocery prices have gone up past 6 months, whether they feel like rent's gone up or down past 6 months, how much, like, if you get them to estimate, like, in the last 3 years, if you had to guess, how much has, like, rent gone up by, or, like, do you know what inflation was year on year? Do you know what the year on year inflation is, right? Anything. You ask them anything, even, like, somewhat related to economics, people answer really badly. Like, people's own, like, intuitive sense of how the economy is going is, like, pretty bad, like, very bad, in fact. But the tragic thing about that is, and the kind of frustrating thing about that is, it's also very powerful. People's perception of the economy is so powerful for winning an election. Alan Lichtman, as I said, he said, it doesn't really matter what happens 18 months before, as long as in that past 9 months you create the truth and the feeling, not just the truth but the perception of a good economy, then that kind of, like, you don't need many more things to win the election. But this happens a lot. People's attitudes towards the economy often don't line up, and the best theory that I've seen so far as to why this could be happening is that rent has been going up like crazy in America. Like, it always has been, but, like, a lot of stuff gets nipped in the bud. Like, the Biden administration, he seems to have some genuine, like, policies and, like, beliefs, like, in his heart. He's not completely, like, a soulless ghoul who's just doing whatever he's told. He does seem to have some beliefs and, like, morals. And one thing that he's actually seemed to want to tackle is price gouging. So, like, things like that. And obviously, because grocery prices are such a big talking point, he's been harping on the price gouging. You know, he's been increasing fracking so much. Even though you might have heard Trump says he wants to do that. That's not a Trump thing, that's a Biden thing. But Biden's just unbelievably incompetent, so he can't capitalize on that, or he won't. Biden's been fracking loads to try and get oil prices down because, you know, you get more gas and, you know, demand goes up. It's not demand, sorry. Supply goes up. Stuff like that. Certain things get nipped in the bud or mitigated because of the political landscape. But rent, I guess, because it obviously connects to landlords and it connects to the system in a much more direct way, because obviously it's all tied up in banking and like housing as like an arbitrary abstract investment, and how that ties into the economy. And like that's much more of a systematic thing, going after rent and like mortgages and stuff. You can go after like price gouging because that's a bit less systemic. It's just like, do what you're doing but like 10% cheaper. It's a very different thing. It's a very different Rubicon to cross. If you start doing like rent controls or anything, like in America, if you start doing rent controls, that's a very different thing. So this has just been left unchecked. While everyone's thinking about grocery prices, rent has just been sort of left unchecked. It's been raising like crazy in America. So what I saw someone say was that a good possibility is that people perceive of rent as not even like an expense. They just perceive it as like an automatic thing. They don't think of it like they're shopping or electricity or other utilities or whatever. They just see rent as like a before thing because it's never in your account, really. I mean, I guess it is, but depends what sort of system you have. But like rent is like one thing. You pay your rent and then you pay everything else. You know what I mean? So that psychological difference where rent doesn't in a lot of ways it doesn't feel like an expense. It doesn't feel like you've got that money and then you choose to spend that money because it's just an automatic thing that happens every month or every 3 months or whatever. That could be what's affecting people to make them think that groceries are more expensive or still getting more expensive. So a lot of people, like, because just the truth doesn't matter to them. Republican politicians are saying that groceries are still rocketing. No, absolutely not. They're coming down. They're absolutely not still skyrocketing. But the reason that it feels that way seems to be because of a general squeezing, because of rent mainly, maybe a couple other things. I'm not fully educated on all the different expenditures, but it seems to be rent is squeezing people. So because of that general feeling of being squeezed, things don't go as far. When you go to the shops, things don't go as far. And if you're like a 100 IQ, 90 IQ American, you might be like, oh, groceries are more expensive. You know, they're not. So those are the main things. The Israel-Lebanon war is the big one. And the second thing is the mitigation of the good economic factors that are there for Harris, because people literally don't realize that they're happening. Americans literally don't know that they're happening because of other things constricting them. Because I mean, I guess I shouldn't really laugh, because yeah, at the end of the day, they're still being squeezed. So it's not nice, but it is just a little bit silly that they don't even know. But yeah, so those are the two main things that like sort of were unexpected things for me. I mean, it wasn't unexpected for Israel to invade Lebanon at some point, but I just didn't know it was going to happen 11 days after I filmed that video. So I shouldn't have made that prediction. I was wrong. Kamala seems to be 1% ahead. So we're 1 day before Americans start going to the polls. What's my prediction now, with all that being said? So my prediction now for the US general election, which will be my final prediction until the day, which doesn't really count, is that still Kamala is slightly favoured to win for me. 55%, just about 55% chance she's going to win, 45% chance Trump's going to win. Because the reasons are, it just comes down to the swing states. Her overall things, the overall trends are bad. 1% lead, I don't know if you didn't see it in the last video, 1% lead for Democrats isn't enough to win. 1% by the popular vote, because they have a thing called the Electoral College, which is basically unfair. It's an unfair system. Winning the popular vote doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win the Electoral College. Normally, it's only one way. It's only for Democrats. I can't explain it now. I've only got so much time. But basically, Democrats need to get over 2% is the rule of thumb to win an election. They need to win it by over 2% to actually win it. So 1% isn't enough, but it comes down to the swing states. Pennsylvania is the most important one. Pennsylvania has a lot of electoral college votes. Michigan, Wisconsin, and too many states. I don't know what it's called. Michigan, Wisconsin, and something else. Maybe Milwaukee. There are 3 states in a line near the northeast of America, which are traditionally Democrat strongholds. But they're in play now. They've been in play since 2016 when Trump ruffled things up. And now they're swing states. And it seems like Kamala has pretty good leads in all of them. If she wins all of them, all of those 3 states, plus Pennsylvania, that's it. She's won. Just about. It's the most slim victory ever. Exactly 270 electoral college votes, which is the minimum you need to have a majority. The exact minimum by 1. And that's not like a worst case scenario. That's like a realistic case. So it's either that, or if she loses Pennsylvania, and again, it's basically 50-50 on Pennsylvania, but she seems, particularly because of early voting, because in the past few days we've also had early voting, I forgot to mention. They don't just vote on one day in America. Everything's going to be more complicated. So they have write-in ballots, which you can mail in like 4 weeks or something before the election. Depends on the state. And also early voting, which I don't know exactly how that's different. I think you go in person, or you don't do it through the mail. You go to a drop box. Again, depends from state to state, but you either go to a polling booth or you go to a drop box and you just fucking drop your ballot for the election into like a glorified post box. So it kind of is a mail-in ballot anyway, and you just leave it. Like they're not attended. But that's a whole other thing. That's not even the issue right now, but that's crazy. But data from early voting and mail-in voting seems to suggest a Democratic lead. And that's not just a basic, more Democrats, because obviously there's other factors, but again, no time to go over it, but they've locked in those factors. They've weighted it for the bias for Democrats towards early voting, which is much lower now because Trump has been saying, get out there and vote early to Republicans because of some stupid conspiracy theory shit. But about sorry, I'm thinking of a particular state, but a big chunk, people are saying maybe up to 1/3 of votes have already been cast, which is unprecedented. Like, well, no, sorry, it isn't, because COVID 2020, but almost unprecedented. It's unprecedented when we're not in a global pandemic. But yeah, like a big chunk of people have already voted, and the early preliminary data seems to be pretty good for Kamala. But yeah, so if she loses Pennsylvania but still gets those 3, she would either have to get Arizona and Nevada, or she'd have to flip the slight Trump win of North Carolina, which is the only of the 7 swing states that he won last time. He won it by a 1 or 2 point margin, I think. So if she flips North Carolina and wins all those 3 states, then that's another way, plus either Nevada or Arizona. So there's a few different combinations, but there's only really a few realistic combinations of these 7 states that can actually lead to a Kamala victory, and every single one, it is close to the slimmest possible majority. We're not talking about like a big strong victory. I would be very surprised if this election is a blowout, but as I say, the early data on the early voting seems to be a bit better for Kamala, and her combinations of states, 238 to win, no, not 238, 270 to win is another good resource. I'll link in the description, and on that website you can go and you can tweedle all the different combinations of swing states, and the combinations that Trump has are just a little bit less realistic, a little bit more restrictive than what Kamala has. If Trump doesn't win Pennsylvania, there's very few combinations, because it's unlikely that he's going to flip more than one of those 3 stronghold states. So I think it gets pretty silly where he'd have to flip like 2 of them, plus keeping North Carolina, plus either flipping Georgia or flipping Arizona and Nevada. It gets a bit silly. But that's my prediction. God, It's up and down. It's up and down so much. Because on like, because in like late July, I was talking about Joe Biden having a stroke before election day and giving it a 50-50 chance of Joe Biden versus Trump. And then I was like, oh, Kamala. And everyone was like, for a little bit like, oh yeah, hope. And then in 20th of September, I was thinking, oh yeah, you know, she's up almost 3 points, on track to be up 4, 5, 6 points maybe. 80% Kamala. And now on the night before, on the 4th of November, I'm saying 55% Kamala. She's come down quite a lot. We're not 80, 85. We are really not 80 to 85% Kamala territory anymore. And 55% might be pushing it. Like the general gist, just from like the media, is 50. It's literally just a toss up. Like it's literally just 50-50 coin flip for a lot of people right now. But I do think that it is leaning Kamala slightly, just because of those little things. And again, you can't read into them that much because we don't have consistent methodologies on early voting. And even if we did, like substantial things are changing from the last election, and the last election was in COVID, and the one before that, you're going back 8 years. It's very dodgy, but the little indications do seem to point towards Kamala winning. And as I say, her swing state combos are just a little bit better. So that's the final prediction before election day. It was 50-50 Joe Biden Trump, then it went up to 80-85% Kamala winning, and now the final prediction before election day from your arbiter of truth, who is always right. I've never made a prediction on this channel that hasn't completely come to fruition. The final prediction from your arbiter is a 55% chance of Kamala Harris winning the 2024 US election, 45% chance of Donald Trump winning. Really sorry that I can't be more confident than that, but it's not just me. This is really close, and it's unlikely that anyone's gonna get like more than 300 electoral college votes. This is very close, but the stakes are pretty high for America. Like, as I said, I've talked about Project 2025 before, talked about Trump's tendencies, about how things are different from this time around, about how there was a lot of Boy Who Cried Wolf in 2016, and how that's different from 2020 and now 2024. But yeah, pretty high stakes, and the best I can say, 55% chance that Kamala wins. So I'll see you in 24 hours, maybe a little bit more. There might not even be like a presumed win. There might not be like a confident presumed winner by election night, because last time there wasn't. I mean, COVID slowed it down, but it's not guaranteed in an American election you're going to get a result on the night. So I guess I'll probably start filming in 36 hours and I guess the world will be different, or maybe not. Oh, and I forgot to say, good luck if you're American. Keep safe out there. Keep your passport up to date and be safe. Try and have a good one if you got this far somehow. Goodbye. See ya.